Good morning. Good morning. On this rainy Monday. Oh my gosh, rainy Monday. So I am so proud to be here today. My name is Abby Battis. I'm the new director, even though it's 6 months, it still feels so new. The new director at Historic Beverly, which I am incredibly proud to be representing here today. The reason why we're here today is this past summer, we were really trying to think of ways to engage at our properties. And so how many of you know that we have 3 properties as part of Historic Beverly? There you go. We have the John Cabot House, which really showcases all of our exhibitions, and that's our headquarters. That really takes place, that really showcases what we do year-round. But then during the summer, we open the John Balch House, which is up on the corner of Balch and Cabot. And then, of course, we have the Hale House, which is on Hale Street. And so in order to tell new stories, we're constantly looking at our collections, or we're looking at present day topics. And so I think you can kind of see where I'm going here. But for the Hale House, we wanted something that was going to make you think. And when you think of the Reverend John Hale House, you think of Hale and possibly of his second wife, Sarah, and her inclusion in the Salem witch trials. But you don't really think about the other 250 plus years of history that took place at that location, including the time of the Bancrofts. And I mention the Bancrofts because when I say that the Hale House has been in the Hale family the whole entire time, I include the Bancrofts because it's with the last female Hale descendant, it becomes the Bancroft House. And so the Hales, I'm a Hale, 8th great granddaughter of Reverend John Hale and Sarah Hale. But when I say that there were Hale women in the house, including the Bancrofts, that is the Hale lineage that is in the house. And thinking about those women at a time when they couldn't vote was kind of mind-blowing. And so we had a really big conversation at Historic Beverly about how are we going to activate the Hale House this past summer. And we started to look around, and the first place I go to is the Smithsonian, because the Smithsonian really has it all. Unfortunately, not right now. But they have a fantastic traveling exhibition program, from objects that can go on display to poster displays. And we found this poster display that is up on view right now here in this space at the Beverly Public Library. But this poster display really spoke to the topics we wanted to address at the Cabot House. So that allowed us this past summer for just a few weeks at the Hale House, for just a few weeks at the Hale House, this allowed us to put up this poster display and start tying in this history to a more contemporary history of the house, talking about the Bancroft women and how they might not have expected to go through a process of fighting for their rights to vote. And so there's a little bit of a background of how this exhibit came to be. I'm here to talk about the poster exhibition, and the poster exhibition has actually been around for quite a bit. I say that because the Smithsonian created it specifically in 2020 to celebrate the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment, one of the most significant milestones in the history of American democracy. But as you can imagine, what happens in 2020? The pandemic, and it doesn't see an awful lot of light. Their exhibit on votes for women had over 280 artifacts, including a copy of the 19th Amendment signed by all of the women who fought for it. And so absolutely fantastic, but it wasn't on view for long. Well, they knew how important this exhibition was, and so that's why they created the traveling, we call them traveling trunk shows, because they come to you completely prepared and you can just put them up, which is really, really neat. So, the truth of the matter is we've got the story of suffrage, women's suffrage, and it's far more than a story about the vote. It is, in truth, a story about citizenship, about equality, and the ongoing evolution of American democracy. When our Constitution was written, it was silent on women, excluded from most of the rights and privileges of citizenship. Women operated in limited and rigid roles, while enslaved women were excluded from all. Yet women have actively participated as citizens, organizing, marching, petitioning, since the very founding of our country, sometimes quietly and sometimes with a roar. Women's roles have been redefined over time. That statement really captures the essence of this exhibition, that women's persistence has continually reshaped our nation's political and cultural life. Votes for Women, A Portrait of Persistence, outlines more than 80 years of activism, tracing women's struggle for suffrage as part of the larger fight for equality that continued through the 1965 Civil Rights Act. And as we know, it continues even today. This presentation is going to be organized with 6 different areas, and it is thematic. So you can see that we are going to touch upon different eras of time. And so the first is the radical women. Then we move into women activists. Then we talk about the new woman. We talk about the compelling tactics that took place. We talk about the militancy in the American suffragist movement. And then, of course, we talk about the 19th Amendment and its legacy. Each theme builds on the previous one, showing how ideas, leadership, and strategy evolved across generations. Together, they form a visual and narrative biography of the movement's most influential figures, starting with Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Sojourner Truth, and Ida B. Wells. We begin in the early 19th century, a time when women could not vote. They could not hold public office. They could not serve on juries. They could not control their own property. Higher education was closed to them, and married women had few legal rights apart from their husbands. Yet the movement for reform was stirring. Women active in abolitionist and religious reform began to question their own exclusion from civic life. In 1848, Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Lucretia Mott organized the Seneca Falls Convention in New York. This was the first women's rights convention in the United States. There, they issued the Declaration of Sentiments, modeled on the Declaration of Independence, that proclaimed that all men and women are created equal. That document, the Declaration of Sentiments, demanded broad reform, including the radical idea that women should have the right to vote. Among the attendees was Frederick Douglass, the formerly enslaved abolitionist and newspaper editor. In his North Star publication, he wrote, quote, "In respect to political rights, there can be no reason in the world for denying to woman the elective franchise," end quote. From the start, the movement for women's rights was intertwined with the struggle for racial equality and abolition. And I do have to make a statement. How many of you know about Susan B. Anthony? Very, very close with Frederick Douglass, even though that's not what the story says. It was Susan B. Anthony and Frederick Douglass who really, really pushed this movement forward. But Susan B. Anthony could not support anything that Frederick Douglass was doing because it would actually stop advancement of women's rights. So as he was fighting for racial justice, including Black women, Susan B. Anthony could not support it for fear that Black women would be included in whatever Douglass was going to do, and white women and Native Americans wouldn't have been included. So they were very, very close friends, but they really couldn't support each other because they were on separate paths completely. One trip that I really strongly suggest for you to do is head out to the Susan B. Anthony house. And you see that really wonderful relationship that they had, but you see the struggle that they have in supporting each other. So after the Civil War, we're at 1870 to 1892, the nation ratified the 15th Amendment, granting Black men the right to vote, but not women. This created a painful division in the suffrage movement. Two organizations emerged with differing strategies. The National Women's Suffrage Association, which is NWSA, led by Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony, opposed the 15th Amendment because it did indeed exclude women. They pursued a federal amendment guaranteeing the vote for all women. The American Women's Suffrage Association, the AWSA, led by Lucy Stone, seen here on the left, and Julia Ward Howe, shown here on the right, supported the amendment and worked state by state to achieve suffrage incrementally. Well, you've got two different women's associations. Why not bring them together, right? In 1890, these two organizations merged to form the National American Woman Suffrage Association, NAWSA, marking a new, more unified campaign for voting rights. As the 20th century approached, American women began to step into public life in new ways. This era gave rise to the so-called New Woman, independent, educated, and politically aware. Here we are. Many of these women were college graduates, journalists, teachers, and reformers who brought the energy of the progressive era into this strong fight for suffrage. African American women like Mary Church Terrell, who's seen here on the left, and Adela Hunt Logan, seen here on the right, tied the suffrage cause to broader struggles for racial justice, including labor rights and education. Suffrage wasn't simply about the right to vote. It was about the right to self-determination. Between 1913 and 1916, does this look familiar? Present day familiarity? Possibly? The largest, most amazing crowds were coming out. Between 1913 and 1916, the women's suffrage movement in the United States became far more strategic, became really, really public, and really confrontational, marking a pivotal shift from patient lobbying to highly visible and emotionally compelling tactics. These years saw suffragists transform their cause into a national spectacle of protest, of persuasion, endurance, forcing the issues of votes for women into the public eye and onto the national political agenda. The National American Woman Suffrage Association and the more militant National Woman's Party, founded by Alice Paul and Lucy Burns, staged large-scale parades and pageants designed to capture the press attention and really to draw on the public imagination. For example, in 1913, the Women's Suffrage Parade in Washington, D.C., held the day before Woodrow Wilson's inauguration, featured over 5,000 women marching down Pennsylvania Avenue. Despite heckling and violence from onlookers, the event generated massive publicity and sympathy for the suffrage cause. The spectacle emphasized discipline, symbolism, and visual impact. White dresses were worn for purity. Gold was used on all of the symbolism for hope. Purple for dignity, creating iconic imagery that still defines the movement. And I think you can see that this is a postcard that was created for that day. And you see the themes and the symbolism that was used. And this really started to create the visual movement. So whenever you saw a woman in a white dress, you knew that she was a supporter of this movement. If you saw women wearing yellow flowers, wearing purple sashes, you could see them from across the street. You could identify them in markets. You knew you were standing with your sisters, with your supporters. Suffragists mastered visual storytelling to frame their struggle as patriotic and moral. They staged elaborate tableaux, wore symbolic colors, and employed banners and slogans to communicate clarity of purpose. Newspapers, postcards, and photographs helped to spread suffrage imagery nationwide. The NWP's silent sentinels, who you see here up on the screen, beginning in 1917, but really truly rooted in their tactics in 1913 to 16, they emerged from this period of time where they're using the most visual protests that you can imagine. Women standing silently with banners that challenge the president's democratic credentials. Lobbying and political targeting is where we are. The NAWSA, under Carrie Chapman Catt, who you see here on the screen, developed what was called the Winning Plan, a dual strategy that pursued state-by-state campaigns while also pressuring for a federal constitutional amendment. Suffragists carefully tracked congressional allies and opponents. They wrote letters, they met with legislators, and organized suffrage schools, where they would train local activists in persuasion techniques. They tailored messages to appeal to political pragmatism, arguing that enfranchising women would purify politics and improve society, not overturn it. The younger generation, led by Alice Paul, who you can see here on the right, introduced a more British style of militant tactics: picketing, hunger strikes, and nonviolent resistance. While these escalated after 1916, the groundwork had been laid during the period, this period, as women began directly challenging the political establishment rather than working solely through political petitioning. Suffragists expanded their networks beyond elite white women's clubs to include the working class women, temperance activists, and reformers. The movement used door-to-door canvassing, mass meetings, and petitions to create local pressure. And it's absolutely amazing to read about the door-to-door canvassing. Your homes really were the advertising spaces. You would hang things in your windows, hang things on your doors. So as people are traveling throughout your cities and towns, it is clear who is really pushing for the women's vote. The visibility of women's participation in World War I, specifically the World War I Relief Act or relief work, began soon after this period of time. It was truly a continuation of the patriotic appeal that was being built during these years. After 42 years of debate, Congress did pass the 19th Amendment in 1919. It was ratified in August of 1920 after a dramatic vote in Tennessee decided by Harry Byrne, whose mother urged him to, quote, be a good boy and support it. It read, "The right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of sex." You can see a copy of that amendment up here. Although the 19th Amendment declared that the right to vote cannot be denied on the basis of sex, it did not guarantee voting access to all women. Surprise. Citizenship laws, poll taxes, intimidation, and violence continued to deny voting rights to many African Americans, Latina, Native Americans, Asian Americans, immigrants, and poor women. Many Black women could not vote freely until the Voting Rights Acts of 1965. Coretta Scott King reminded us at that time, freedom is never really won. You earn it and win it in every generation. Think about that. Want me to read that again? Freedom is never really won. You earn it and win it in every generation. When our Constitution was written, it was silent on women. Yet through nearly 2 centuries of activism, women's voices, persistent, diverse, and courageous, have become an essential part of our democracy. From Seneca Falls to Selma, from Susan B. Anthony to Stacey Abrams, the story of American suffrage is the story of persistence itself. Votes for Women, a portrait of persistence, invites us to ask, how do we protect the rights won through so much struggle? How do we ensure every citizen's voice is heard today? The women whose portraits and stories fill this exhibition remind us that democracy is not a gift. It's an ongoing effort, renewed by every generation who chooses to stand up and participate. So I'm going to thank you now, but I'm not done. Because you have to know, I have a lot of activities that we're going to do for the next half hour. So thank you for joining me to honor these voices and for continuing the work of persistence in your own time. But now I have some questions. You don't have to get up yet, but I have some questions that I'd love to see hands if you have an answer. So when you heard that I was coming to speak about this exhibition, or maybe you've come in to see the exhibition, and you heard or you read Votes for Women, what came into mind? What images came to mind? Were there colors? Were there names? What did you bring to this lecture today that you already knew before you came in? Yes.
The purple and yellow and stories that women use them as subtle communication when they couldn't speak aloud.
Yes, the use of color, the purple, the yellow, the white, using it as communication, visual communication, when they were not allowed to talk about it. Yes.
I've read a couple of books, and I knew the Seneca Convention and things like that, some of the split, but I've forgotten details that you reminded me of. But what really came to mind is on the ground. I know that I can't remember the group, but they've been digitizing the voter registration records in Boston and around. And I discovered, and I'm really curious now about women in my family, because I did find voter registration records for my great-grandmother that was before the amendment was ratified in Massachusetts. So I was just thinking about what was happening locally in terms of women and activities and things like that, and what was going on in our region relative to this. So that was on my mind.
So I'm going to repeat what your answer so everybody can hear, including BevCam. So in thinking about this exhibit, thinking about coming to this lecture, you started to think about your own family and what the women in your family experienced, as well as what's taking place in our region.
What took place?
What took place in our region. And I can say, to answer that question, Historic Beverly does have a pretty strong collection of suffragist materials. Specifically, we have an awful lot of propaganda that was being used at the time, but then there are some voting rolls or voting documents that for some reason didn't end up at the city archives. And so we do have quite a split. I'm sure the city archives has a more thorough group of voter rolls. But this is definitely an opportunity to take a good look at what we have in our collection to kind of start talking about it. So, but documentation throughout all the cities and towns should still exist. What else? Yes.
For the last 3 years, anyways, maybe more than that, I've attended in August of the day that the amendment was ratified. There's a group of people who meet at the Swan Boats to celebrate votes for women. And the swans on that day wear sashes, that's purple and gold sashes, that say votes for women.
That's fantastic. So every year there's a gathering of people to celebrate the amendment, and they gather at the Swan Boats in Boston. And they tell the story, probably read the amendment, and the Swan Boats actually have the sashes on, the Votes for Women sashes.
And do you know the story of the Swan Boats?
I don't. The story of the Swan Boats.
So the man who came up with the idea, I want to say the 1880s, that might not be quite right, so he started it, the Swan Boats, it was successful. After about a year, he died, and his wife was the inheritor. But Boston businessmen did not want a woman to own a business. So for about 30 years, there was back and forth legal stuff. And in the end, she got the right. And now the Swan Boats are owned by her, I think it's great-granddaughter.
That is fantastic. So did not know that. So the Swan Boats were basically a woman-run business that wasn't allowed for almost 30 years to run the business in Boston. And now a great-great-granddaughter of her actually runs the business. So that ties in perfectly to what we're talking about today. Thank you.
The same family owns the Swan Boat as when it was founded. It's been the same family.
Same family for the Swan Boats. That's fantastic.
So, have you ever been out to the Women's Rights National Park in Seneca Falls?
Yes.
It's a good take. It really is.
Yes, so head out to Seneca Falls to the Women's Rights National Monument. And thank you. Oh, I see 2 hands. Yes.
What day is this event at the Swan Boat? Specifically, what day?
It's the day of the anniversary of the amendment.
So what day is that?
I
Is it in August?
so I believe it's in August. Yeah. Next.
I was thinking that today's lecture would be an enhancement of the many activities that transpired during the 100th anniversary, and I had the experience of attending the installation of the metal plaques that were, some of which that were installed throughout the state of Massachusetts and across the country, in particular the one at at Hamilton Hall in Salem, and the one in Danvers.
Historical Society.
The Page House.
So going to the 100th anniversary in 2020 and the big activities that took place to honor the 100th anniversary, including the plaques that went up in Hamilton Hall in Salem and the Page House in Danvers. Fantastic. Yes.
I read something quite some time ago that struck me to the point that I always vote. No matter what we're voting for in Salem where I live, I always go to vote because I read about some of these during the era with some of the confrontations on the street were quite violent.
Correct.
And women were being thrown in jail. And essentially, if they were hunger striking, they were force fed.
Yes.
And it was quite painful.
Yes.
It wasn't anything I'd ever heard before and didn't know.
Interesting.
And then he said, you gotta get to the polls. Doesn't matter what the weather's like. It
Yes.
just doesn't matter.
I do think that when talking about this time in history and the activities that the women were doing, I think the horror behind how they were treated is truly, it is left out of the story. But that was the hunger strikes, being force-fed, being thrown in jail, being abused, being killed, because there were some that, were either stoned, hoping that they could deter women from advancing forward. So police would throw things, they would be hit in the head and either, left really maimed or dead. Correct, being bombed or their homes being set on fire. This was truly a revolution that has been overlooked quite a bit. So my next question is, if you had to explain the suffrage movement in one sentence to a 10-year-old, what would you say?
Perseverance.
Perseverance.
Vote, it's important.
Vote, it's important.
It's time for each person to be represented by voters.
It's time for each person to be represented by a vote.
Fighting for the rights to equality.
Fighting for the rights to equality.
For everyone.
For everyone.
Women suffered so that we can have this right today.
Women suffered so that we can have this right today. Didn't think I'd make you think so early on a rainy Monday, right? All right. So, a little bit harder for you. How might a small community space, like a library or historical society, have served as a hub for organizing then and now?
Providing meeting space.
Providing meeting space. Then they probably could. Now, I can't at Historic Beverly. You can? So the Beverly Public Library can provide meeting space for organizations like this. However, Historic Beverly cannot, because we are a nonprofit and we fall under what is called the Johnson Amendment. And it was established by President Johnson, where we cannot take any type of side on political movements. If we represent a movement, we represent all sides factually. So, for instance, if both mayoral candidates this past election came to us to say, hey, can we rent your space? I couldn't give one a deal over the other. They would have to receive the same exact thing, the same exact cost, so that the perception is we're not taking sides. And so if I'm doing this for the suffragists, I'm going to have to do this for the same exact offering for the other side. Yes?
Do you have any records from that time?
Yes.
Any of these time periods?
Yes.
Anyone asked the library back then, years ago, can they say, yes, do they have any meetings, what to do with women's rights? And did anyone approach Historic Beverly and they were told no?
So we don't have documentation of anybody approaching us. So back then, the Johnson Amendment didn't cover the Historical Society because that was President Johnson. So I'm sure they could have had meetings at the Historical Society. We don't have records of anybody asking to have meetings. We do have records of meetings taking place, but not at the Historical Society. Great question.
Well, I would think that even if a meeting couldn't be held in one of these establishments, you would still find people filtering in and out they're like-minded, they would encounter each other and start talking, and the germ would be there, and then they would find a place to meet and grow.
So a place to meet and grow so that they can really build in strength, but also build in membership?
Right.
Yes.
Do you have any records of any of these large groups that were picketing or whatever in Beverly?
Not for picketing, no. For meeting, yes. We don't have any type of meeting notes. So whatever took place at individual houses, individual gatherings in Beverly, we don't have any of those minutes that have that are actually engaged with Beverly. I'm sure that City Hall must have that in their archive, or maybe the Beverly Room here at the library. So, yes.
What about media, newspaper print at the time? Was there a lot of coverage?
Very much so. And that leads me into my next question, is that if we were to commission an exhibit like this for today, I know I'm opening a can of worms, what would be the headline? What would be the image? What would be the call to action?
What would the purpose be of the exhibition?
Votes for Women.
Well, if it's historical, probably wouldn't be as controversial as something current.
What about Votes for Women for today?
I mean, other parts of the world.
It could be other parts of the world or here today. Because could we lose our voting rights? Tony?
I was over at the Beverly Democrats, and when we were talking at the meeting there, that said that they want to enshrine in our state constitution a woman's right to choice. And then it was raised the issue, do we also want to go ahead and have gay rights? To have that, so if someone's had the same-sex marriage, the federal government sometimes takes that away. Now, it seems ludicrous to think that they're going to take away a woman's right to vote, but I think that I want to do everything I can to make sure that my 4 sisters, continue to have their right to vote, always.
So what would that headline be?
I can't remember who you quoted saying, but it's basically every generation.
Coretta Scott King. Yes. Every generation has this fight. And here we are today. Multiple generations looking down at, really the barrel of the gun of we might lose our voting rights as women. And if one voting right goes, the voting rights of so many others are lost as well, right?
I stand arm in arm with women for the right to vote.
Ah, great headline. I stand arm in arm with women for the right to vote. Great headline.
There are no guarantees.
There are no guarantees. That's another great headline.
Let's keep our right to vote.
Let's keep our right to vote. Another great headline.
Still struggling after all these years.
Still struggling after all these years. Let's keep the right to vote. Great headline.
Well, when I think of when they were passing the equal rights in Congress, I have a picture of a generic member of Congress on the front page of the newspaper who looks like he just got stabbed because he doesn't want to vote for it. I have this view of his face of a man who would not vote for it.
So you're tying into past history and the visuals.
Right, the visual when it came up in Congress to vote for it.
When it comes up in Congress to vote for it.
The generic face in front of me of a congressman or a senator who won't vote for it.
That there's a politician who just looks pained having to vote for it.
Yeah.
Could that happen today?
Sure. Yes. And the amazing thing is I think that a lot of congressmen and senators, the money in their family is not the person in Congress, it's their spouse, their wife. There's a lot of senators and reps whose wives are worth more money than they are.
So there's in Congress, in government, that there's that perpetuating history of the woman being wealthier and more powerful than the men. But yet they're left at home, keep them at home, and the money is still fielded through the politician. Okay?
Congress still gets their paycheck, unlike a lot of workers, including air traffic controllers.
Correct. So the government still receive their paycheck no matter what.
Do your job.
Okay. So we've had some great discussion here. We have about 15 minutes left. I would like for you all now to get up to explore the exhibit. And I have a couple of questions as you start to get through some of the panels. I have some of the questions for you to kind of put to work as you look at the exhibit. Does that sound like a plan?
Yeah.
Okay. So feel free, get up, walk around. Okay, so you have been taking a look at some of the posters. And my first question is, do you see those symbols, those hallmarks, the colors, the shape? Do these posters set the mood now that you know what we're looking for with the hallmarks of the women's rights, the suffragist movement? Yes? Thumbs up? Thumbs down? Wonderful. Could you identify a slogan or a caption that you have seen?
Treat your brothers and sisters as you would yourself.
Treat your brothers and sisters as you would yourself. Any other slogan or caption?
Well, this caught me, suffragists were political geniuses.
Suffragists were political geniuses. What a slogan.
I like this one over here, American suffrage had courage, so it takes courage to continue the fight.
American suffrage had courage. It takes courage to continue to fight.
Fight for your rights.
Fight for your rights. What audience do you think this exhibit is targeted to?
Men.
Really quick response there, men. People in their 20s.
I just don't understand that they take it for granted that women always had the right to vote.
So it's thought that this could be for a younger demographic because the vote is taken for granted, that most of this voting age bracket doesn't necessarily understand the history from which our vote comes.
Neither does our age bracket.
Neither does our age bracket, is what a response is in the room. So having not been born in 1910, 1920, how are you supposed to understand the history that went on?
I think this is a pet peeve of mine. The presence of civics education in the schools has lessened and lessened over the years. My civics class in high school was only half a year, which was one of the few classes I remember. And that's where you learn about how the government and the world works, and you can talk about things like that. So my thing is always to try to remind the politicians I think kids should have some civics in every single grade, age appropriate, of course. So it becomes normalized that they're thinking about these things.
Correct. So in thinking about education in the school systems and the loss of civics over time, and I can confess to the loss of history, because we're hearing an awful lot of teachers saying it's either history or teaching the exam. It's history or this. It's history or that. And we lose history. We lose civics. So trying to bring that back at a very young age to start the foundation for understanding the history and the civic engagement that needs to happen as an individual here in the United States. And I had Tony?
I was just curious too, I know you can't put everything in one exhibit, but I know that women weren't allowed to have a credit card in their name until 1974, which is really shocking to me because that is definitely in my lifetime. And then, what do you have about, any thoughts about how bicycles help women's independence? I've read articles about that.
So you're bringing in an awful lot of what was, but that was the importance of this exhibit. So when the actual exhibit, Votes for Women, went on view at the Smithsonian, like I said, it was almost 280 objects, being a bicycle and then clothing. So the way that women would act and engage in daily life, such as riding a bike, are they going to ride it with their skirt on one side, their butt on their seat, write it that way? Or are they going to pull the skirt up between their legs and write it like a man at the time? I would do that. But that was telling. That was a visual cue to understand, oh, she's one of them. But also, it's the clothing. And this dates back into the 1800s, where there was a woman, I don't know if you know of Rosa Bonheur, who was a French painter of landscapes. And she actually was one of the first women to petition her local government in London to get a pass to wear pants. Because she said, if I'm going to go out in the fields and I'm going to be standing there with wild horses and I'm painting, I really can't do it in a dress. And so the government gave her the pass to wear pants. To wear pants. This is late 1800s.
Even riding horses, it was a big deal.
Exactly. Even riding horses, you had to ride side saddle. That was what the word I was looking for, side saddle. You couldn't wear pants, but Rosa Bonheur wore pants. Well, the other thing too is Rosa Bonheur was a lesbian. And so she took that license and said, you know what, I'm going to wear pants all the time. And no one said anything, because if they saw her, she'd be like, here's my legal pass that I can wear pants. And no one questioned whether she could wear pants on the street or wear pants out in the fields to do her painting. So the whole idea of clothing really transformed this movement as well. Those pure white dresses, if you see any of them, Google the white dresses of the suffragist movement, they almost look like communion dresses. It was so important, the messages that they could convey and what they were wearing. And then in everything of everyday life, you think of the bicycles, riding of horses, etc.
There were two things, family pictures of my family. They have a reunion at Gettysburg every year. And some of the old pictures, you can't identify any of the women because they all have white dresses on. They all look the same. But I think one of the biggest things that was invented that got women out of their house in the workforce was the typewriter. Because then they could go into an office and have a legitimate job.
So talking about, what is getting the women out of the house, the invention of the typewriter. They could get out of the house and go into an office to work.
Today, just about everybody can type because they all have a computer.
Exactly.
But I remember when I was in college, if you could write a paper, it had to be typed. And I had a family friend that she used to make a fortune at Harvard Law typing briefs.
Yes.
And hire somebody to do it.
Wearing white clothing was no small feat because they didn't have the laundering capabilities that we have today.
Exactly. Wearing white all the time was so challenging, trying to keep it clean. Especially dirt roads, getting over trolley tracks. It was tough. Well, we are at 10:30. I want to thank all of you for coming out, doing something a little bit different, tying in my lecture with the exhibit. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope to see you at upcoming programs at Historic Beverly. We have our big film screening for free of the Ken Burns documentary, The American Revolution, taking place at the Cabot. It's 6 full nights. Each night is a different film. So you can go all 6 nights for free. We got it completely grant funded to allow the public to go and see it, which is really, really exciting. And then we have a whole slew we have coffee and conversations coming up. We have First Friday coming up. Lots of great topics, lots of free programming. So I hope that you tune in, and I hope to see you in the galleries soon. Thank you so much.